Hello everyone and welcome to ZP Productions. Today we will review this really brand new lens. This is the Canon RF 35mm F1.4 VCM. And the VCM is just their own special term for linear motor, voice coil motor, that's what they call it. But you just need to know that this is the latest 35mm you can get in the market, and Canon made it finally for the RF mount. So before this, I've been using this monster here. This is the Sigma 40mm. It is like the best thing that Canon can use until this came about. So I'm really excited to bring you guys this review, and I believe that in some countries, at least at the point of this review, it's still not out yet. So Singapore is the first few to actually get it. And you can see this is the set I purchased myself, and I pre-ordered it on the first day it was announced. So I'm very excited to share with you guys what I feel about this lens. With my review, I'll split in a few parts. First, we'll talk about the physical aspect. Then we'll talk a little bit on the handling and autofocus. Finally, we'll talk about optical, and then I'll also cover a little bit on the video aspect of this particular lens here to just give you guys a good understanding of what this lens delivers. Now, this lens has been used, at least by me, for 2 photo shoots. In fact, I used it once in rain. I would say as a light to medium level of rain. You can see the lens is really wet. It works really fine. It's fantastic. Without wasting time, let's talk about the build quality. And before I talk about build quality, I just want to show you guys something. Now, this is the RF 35mm box. It is actually a really huge box. And I just want to show you guys one thing inside this box. So inside this box have this very interesting filter mount on the back of the lens. Show you guys how it works. So you can see this is the lens here. This is the back of the lens itself. And you can then put this here and then rotate into place with a filter on. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've seen such a thing for a Canon lens, so I'm pretty sure Canon is really serious about this lens for the purpose of video. So you can actually mount a back filter here, and this back filter allows you to utilize filters without actually needing to have something in front of the lens, so you can put things like matte box and stuff. Quite an innovative way of doing things, and you can see that the lens is designed to put this filter in because there is a notch and it clicks in nicely, as you can hear. So this is just something interesting I want to show you. This is new and is meant to be used with the Canon lens. Now, let's take a look at the physical aspect of this lens. You can see that this lens is not really huge. With the caps off, this is about it. This lens has a linear motor inside, and you can hear the element actually flopping around. Now, you guys may be uncomfortable with it, especially if you never used a LM motor before, but I can tell you that this is normal. Fujifilm, Sony, certain lenses all have this. Those that not supposed to have this sound, they will actually lock the element inside the lens, but those that have this sound means that it's fine doing it. So don't worry if you hear rattling sounds in your lens. That is pretty normal, at least with this lens. Once you on the camera with this lens on, the sound goes away because it will lock the element at a certain position and you have no problems after that. Modern Sony lenses no longer have this issue, so you can actually lock it. It's just that Canon did not lock it for this particular lens. So let's take a look at this lens also further. Now, just now you see my Sony lens here. Physically, the Sony lens is slightly shorter and slightly smaller. Very slight, but the weight wise it is about 40 to 50 grams lighter than the Canon version. So the Sony is still the lightest 35mm you can get in the market, but the Canon is a close second, so don't worry about it. This is still half the weight. I mean, the official weight for this is 550 grams, but you add a filter, add a cap, whatever, is slightly more than that. It's still half the weight of this monstrosity here, so don't sweat over that weight itself. And then you can see in this lens itself there is a few rings. One is the focusing ring here, one is another ring in front, and then there's one more ring that you can use behind. This is actually the aperture ring. So this allows you to smoothly control the aperture behind. I mean, sometimes you can actually program this for aperture, but the clicky stuff, some people don't like it, so Canon actually implemented the proper aperture ring behind. Personally, as a photographer, I will just disable it. So at the side, there's 3 switches. One is the AF/MF switch. I think it's pretty normal. The other one is a button. It's a preset that you can set. And lastly is this iris switch where you can click it and then unlock it. Then you can turn the iris. If not, you can push it up again and then lock it into auto, and then you'll use it like any other normal lens. Overall, I think the feel of this lens is very on par with any L lenses. Nice body, you can see here. very smooth focusing ring with good amount of resistance, very nice iris ring too, and then the clicky presettable ring in front. Now, the element itself doesn't shift much. This is an internal focusing lens. So this lens do not grow longer or shorter when in operation, and you don't see anything moving around outside. The lens itself has a little bit of weather sealing. You can see this rubber here. It is weather resistant, or supposed to be weather resistant, as with any L element. And the front element, I believe it has fluorine coating, but you see me using a filter. Now, for me, I use a filter for a very practical reason, because in Singapore, we come out and go in aircon areas very often. A lot of time it fogs the front element. By just using a filter, I can use any cloth to wipe the lens. But if it's the front element, I have to be really careful in dealing it. So that's the reason why I get a filter. Nothing more, nothing less. That's the reason. And overall, I think this lens from the physical aspect is really nice. Now let's talk about the hood a little bit. So this is the hood for the 35mm. It is a slightly matte feeling hood, very nice quality and feel to it. It doesn't feel like cheap plastic because of its matte coating. And this is the type of hood I like, where it clicks in and you can hear the sound of it clicking, and there's a button to release it. You will never accidentally release the hood, and there are times that I accidentally release the hood halfway if it was a normal friction type, and then you get a bit vignetting here and there. But this is solid, it doesn't shift. And the hood is actually surprisingly quite deep. You can see it's actually quite deep. At least it's deeper than the Sony one, I believe. Sony one is just a round one, while this one is a petal hood. So this is a lot more premium in terms of hood itself. Overall, the build quality, it is really as good as it gets for a 35mm lens at about 1,500 USD. I'll talk more about the price at the end of the video. So that's it for physical. Now let's talk a little bit on the handling. Now, handling in the field is very good. This lens is not heavy, 500 over gram with the body. The body is the heavy one at 1 kg, so 1.5 kg here. So just now I said about the wobbling sound inside the lens. You can still hear it. If I on the camera, it goes away. So for users first time using such a focusing technology, don't be alarmed, it is very normal. So I've done 2 shoots with this camera and lens setup. One shoot is a little bit spicy, so if you are offended by it, just skip through the photos. But if not, the other shoot was a cosplay shoot, and it was shot during rain, so my camera was really wet. And for that shoot itself, I had to shoot with one hand because my other hand was holding a flash. I couldn't put it on the floor because, I had to shoot quick and leave. If not, I would get really, really wet. But, this lens is very reliable and easy to use in the field, and it's not very heavy, unlike the Sigma. Sigma I cannot use with one hand, but this one I can use with one hand, no issues with the R3. If you're using the R5, it's even easier. If you're using the R6, it's even easier. Overall handling of this lens in the field is fantastic. I did try to use the manual focus. The ring is really nice. It's very smooth and buttery. I love it. I never used the iris and the front clicking ring yet because I have no purpose for it, at least in the last 3 days. When it comes to autofocus, there's 2 parts. There is the accuracy, and then there is the tracking part. Let's talk about accuracy first. For portraiture, I care a lot more about accuracy, and this lens is ultra accurate. In the 2 shoots I've done, it is always spot on. Now, the next thing is about tracking and speed of the focus itself. I would say its tracking and speed is pretty good. I do not have a full test, but I managed to get this guy on a bike that's just driving past. So I lift my camera up, focus on him and take a shot. You can see that it is very sharp. And it is a small little 1 second pass by for the motorcycle itself. I also did another shot on the road where the car was coming towards me. I take a shot, you can see the car is ultra sharp at f1.4. This also shows that, it is tracking the car very quickly and then locking on and then allowing me to take the shot itself. Now, this is of course not a very comprehensive test. When I have time, maybe I will do a follow-up video in the future for a more comprehensive autofocus test when it comes to tracking subjects. But I would assume that Canon, this setup here will not miss even if the subject is running towards me, especially with a LM-based system now. Now, the previous time, Canon doesn't have such a fast lens in terms of autofocusing. Canon finally has caught up. So now let's talk about optical quality of this lens. And the best way to describe the optical quality is that it is really good. And it is at least at the minimum comparable with this monstrosity here, the Sigma 40mm f1.4. Now, if you have ever used this lens before or seen review of this, you should know that this is a near perfect lens. It is really, really good, and the reason why I never bought the 35mm EF mount before. This is my mainstay lens. But I did a quick, shot with this camera itself out of my window. I did a comparison with the Sigma. I can tell you that except for the very corner wide open, this lens has a bit of smearing, and that the cause of it losing some resolution there. If not everywhere else in the frame, this lens is as sharp as a Sigma. It's extremely usable. In the center itself, this lens actually has better contrast than the Sigma 40mm 1.4, which is phenomenal. Now that is sharpness. So the next thing is about chromatic aberration, right? Aberration on this lens is very well controlled. Chromatic aberration is one of the most controlled in this lens. You can see that even in the worst case scenario for lateral chromatic aberration, the light tubes on black background do not have any CA. Fantastic chromatic aberration control. Now, I have another shot here that shows you more longitudinal with multiple flagpoles. You can see that in the bokeh region, in the region of focus, there is actually no chromatic aberration. Now, this lens is not perfect in the sense that it has totally no chromatic aberration. In fact, just now, the motorbike shot, if I zoom in on the headlights, there is some chromatic aberration, which means that given the point of focus and slightly off it, there is a chance to get some chromatic aberration there. Now, beyond chromatic aberration, the lens itself has very well controlled aberrations of other type. If you look at the edges of the frame, you will see that the lights have some distortion. That is very normal. They are either spherical, astigma, or coma itself, the different type of aberrations. You can see that the light has some deformation, but it is very minor and still relatively, in a single point itself. Some other lenses have funny butterfly looks. This lens is pretty controlled. So don't worry too much at the edges unless you have tons and tons of small little lights. This lens still will render the lights properly. Now, when it comes to bokeh, I do think that bokeh is a bit weaker on this lens because the bokeh itself has onion ringing. Now, it's been some time since I see a high-end lens with quite a bit of onion ringing. You can see that there is quite a layer there. It only means that if you are shooting in a scene with a lot of these lights in the background, the bokehs will have these lines here which may irritate some people. But I think it's not really a big deal because in real world, it doesn't matter. I'll show you some shots later. Now, when it comes to the sun star, I have no comments on whether is it good or not, but it is a very, very pointy star. You can see a lot of points, and it may satisfy some of you guys. That's about it for all the synthetic tests. Now, let's talk about real-world performance. I have done 2 shoots. Once again, one of my shoots is a bit spicy, so if you are offended by it, do skip forward. I can tell you that the shoots-wise, this camera is very well controlled, very sharp, and I would say it never misses, so I really enjoy using it. I just want to zoom in on the eyes for a few shots just to show you guys how sharp is it. I don't think it's like the world's sharpest lens. That belongs to the A5 1.2, but anywhere in the frame, the sharpness is pretty much guaranteed, and I don't really complain about the sharpness on the eye of the subject itself, as long as the IAF is working properly. Now, when I'm shooting my masker shoot, it sometimes doesn't detect the eye because, IAF and mask doesn't go very well, so that's one of the weaknesses there. But for the other shoot, Fisher with only one eye is still well captured normally, so the eyes is always very tech sharp in those shots. I also want to showcase to you the chromatic aberration in real life. When I shot the mask girl, she was wearing black latex on blue sky. You can see very minimal, if not no chromatic aberration at all. So chromatic aberration on this lens, the control is very good. Now, the last thing I want to show is the bokeh and showcase you some of the bokeh regions of those shots itself. You can see that the bokeh itself is not the smoothest in the world, nor the worst. So it's somewhere in between very busy bokeh to very smooth bokeh like the 85 1.2, which is fine. Which means that bokeh on this lens, as long as you know what you're expecting, it's okay. Now, a lens that have worst of bokeh is something like the 2870 f2 that has a very busy bokeh, or something like mirror lenses which is insanely busy for bokehs itself. So this lens is pretty normal for bokeh smoothness. And last thing I want to cover now is video. Now, video for this lens, I mean, if you have seen the press release, they talk a little bit on video quality and how this is very controlled in the focus breathing. I would say as the focus breathing, There is some, but it's relatively controlled. So if you go from closest to infinity, there is some bleeding. But if you actually do short amount of focusing itself, the focus bleeding is actually quite minimal, and I don't think you actually notice it much. This is way better than the Sony's 35mm f1.4 that has tons of focus bleeding, like serious tons of it. Now there's one last thing I want to cover, just remember, is about the magnification of this lens. Now this lens is not meant to do close-ups for small little objects. You can see here with the SD card, this is the closest I can go, biggest of the magnification, which is not much. So if you are intending to do any close-up shots like wedding rings, this lens is not that good. Use the 35 1.8, which has a macro function, which is pretty much better. And really that's about it. So to summarize, this lens is fantastic. This is a long time coming for Canon. It is a very good 35mm lens, at least as sharp as anything out there that you can think of for the 35mm range. It is very well performing, very controlled in chromatic aberration all the way to the edges itself. It is very, very fast in performance, and if you are pairing it with any of the modern RF cameras, you will have a very good autofocus experience. It's also not really heavy. Finally, Canon has stopped making oversized heavy lenses. I'm very happy about that. Seriously, very happy about that. The only downside of this lens is that it is very expensive for a 35mm. It is the most expensive 35mm, in fact, if I'm not wrong, because the Sony version is only like 1.9k Sing dollars, while this version by Canon is about 2.4k. I mean, over time it will drop, but still it is probably the most expensive 35mm f1.4 you can get in the market. So that's something to note. It is quite expensive there. And that's about it. This is the review of the RF 35mm f1.4 VCM lens, the latest of the 35mm for Canon lenses. And if you are a person that loves 35mm, this is the lens to buy, and it's really good. I'll see you guys again. Bye bye.